So no need for the title again. Thank you so much to the presentations we've seen so far as well. And I hope mine kind of combines nicely with those. We'll see how well it connects to my title. When I work on these things, you never know what you're going to end up with. But let me shift to my dramatic voice, because, I do, when we think about this technology, I think it's important to think of where it started and where we are and what lessons we can learn from that journey. So, dramatic voice. In the beginning, there was Arpanet. Many people might not be familiar with this. This goes back to 1969. So what does this mean? Well, in 1969, there were 4 computers that got connected at 4 different locations. Right there, you see them. And that was the start, the grandfather of what we now think of as the internet. It started way back then, and it started with cutting edge Honeywell computers that had 24K of memory. Right? So back in those days, that was small. I actually started university right at the end of this, 1989. I was a computer science major for 1 semester. That's all I could take. But at Washington State University at that time was connected to the Arpanet. I had no idea what it was called back then. And my experience with this is a friend in one of the classes was from Norway. And he mentioned, I'm going to go talk to my dad after class. And I thought, wow, how cool. Your dad's there. So he goes to the computer lab and he sits down at the computer and he logs in. And pretty soon he types something that is showing up, of course, on the monitor in orange, right? And all of a sudden, there's typing that's coming back. And it's not all in one sentence. It's going letter by letter. And that's him chatting with his father in Norway on the Arpanet in 1989. And it just blew my mind, that you could communicate with someone so far away back then on a computer through something that later became the internet. And this is really the beginning, because my focus is on telecollaboration and language learning, using computers as a tool to communicate with other people. For the past 16 years, I think it is now, I've been working with a professor in Barcelona. Melinda Dooley is her name. She teaches a course there. I teach a course at Illinois. And our students work together every year to telecollaborate and work on projects together. And we've used various technologies to do that. Well, I also like to think about the history. We think of the modern computer revolution. And when I got my first iPhone, how excited I was with the touch screen and yay, all that fun stuff. Well, here's a computer that predates the iPhone considerably. And some of you may be familiar with this. Not sure if you are or not, but this is the Plato 4 computer in 1972. And this very fashionably dressed lady is pointing at the screen. But she's not just pointing at the screen. This is 1972, and that is a plasma touchscreen computer. So a lot of this stuff that we think is new is not new. So this Plato system developed at the University of Illinois had message boards, emails, chat rooms, instant messages, screen sharing. Emoticons were developed on the Plato system, and online games. Star Trek Online. You can still actually play it. The Klingons kill me every time I play it, though. Dungeons and Dragons, and 12,000 hours of courseware, starting back in the late 60s through the 70s and through the 80s. So this is part of our journey. We start with things like MUDs. Some of you may have used MUDs back in the day, multi-user dungeons or domains. Colossal Cave Adventure. That's one of the first text-based interactive game that will look very familiar to people who played games like Zork later on, or British Legends, which is still available today. This was really what we consider the first, but you can still go to the website or search for British Legends and you can play it. I have been in there with students. Here's an example where I went into British Legends. I found a cliff and decided to see if I could jump off of it. I was not depressed, just curious. And as you can see, I did, and a seagull ate my dead body. It's very sad. I've also had a student kill me in this game as I was chatting. It's a risk you have to take. But now we're in immersive text-based environments, very imagination-based. And as we continue to go forward, we move from MUDs to MOOs. Some of you may have used MOOs in the past. At my university, when I was doing my Ph.D., the University of Arizona, they had one called the Old Pueblo MOO. There were thousands upon thousands of MOOs, and they were used extensively in education, like we did at Arizona. Here's an example of one that was called a Schmooze University. It was around a long time. I think it may have finally disappeared. I'm not sure. When Java got killed off, I think it kind of did as well. It's still text-based, but you can see they're starting to have more of a, let's make a map. So you come here to the university, I'm the X down here. If I go north, I'm going to go to the South Mall, Central Mall, North Mall. And the Old Pueblo MOO was structured in a similar way, that you could actually get from the dungeon master your own classroom space. So you could go in there, you could have a space, and I would hold office hours with my students sometimes in the MOO. Because remember, of course, this is before you could do Skype. It's before any of that. So this is a way for them to get together. Immersive in its own way, text-based, but problems with things like no nonverbal communication. I remember holding a conference in there once with a group of students. One student showed up late. When we typed which paper we were working on, he typed back, "Oh, your paper sucks." Pause, 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 pause. Ha ha. Right? He meant it as a joke. and face-to-face interaction, maybe it would have come across as a joke. In this situation, it just came across horrifically bad. Right? And again, just text interaction. Well, this starts to shift over, of course, to pop culture. Some of you may be familiar with this. Star Trek, the animated series, 1974. Wasn't around that long, but they came up with something in the animated series that they didn't in the original Star Trek because they couldn't afford to do it. The recreation room, they called it. Interestingly enough, if you're using VR now, some of you may have gone into a space called Rec Room, which is one of the VR spaces you can have. I think it's a ripoff of the recreation room. Star Trek later came up, though, with the holodeck. Same sort of an idea. Now, in this case, wouldn't this be wonderful? Because it's a truly immersive environment where they literally go through the door into this space and can interact with everything in there. No need for a headset. My fantasy for the future be very nice. In technology, we start to have this shift as well with quantum link. I don't know did anybody use quantum link? I had a friend who had quantum link briefly. I couldn't afford it, but this came out with the Commodore 64 computer, and there were various elements that were available in the quantum link. And one of those included something called Habitat. But think about this. This had, at that time, we're talking 1984, email, games, clubs, shopping, 200,000 products. And this is 8 years before Amazon came about. Amazon was not the revolution people think it was. Software programs, all this kind of jazz. Gambling, they got rid of that eventually because they had to. And this thing called Habitat. Habitat, 1984, was from a company called Lucasfilms, which some of you may be familiar with because that's the same company that did Star Wars. This prototype for Habitat had 20,000 what they called regions, and I'll show you a region in a minute. But this is the first one where now there were structural objects that you could interact with, scenic objects, doors that let you go to other regions. You could text chat with other actual people who showed up in the form of avatars. And there are portable objects that you could get. As I say here, that may have been the beginning of pay to play in these games. And this is what it looked like. right? So it looks familiar, maybe crude, but to those who have used virtual worlds, you can see avatars, they can see each other, they can chat with one another. And again, if they leave the region, they're going to go to another spot. No, it's a restricted space that you can see on your computer at one time. But remember, this was for the Commodore 64. Right? The Commodore 64 did not have a huge amount of memory compared to today's computers. But again, this to me is really the beginning of what we consider to be virtual worlds today. So if we move forward again, now we are getting into this 2.5D of awesomeness in virtual worlds. Some of the early ones include active worlds that some of you may be familiar with. There was a lot of education work done in active worlds. Habbo or Habbo Hotel is one that's aimed at teens. It's certainly still around. Habbo Hotel, one advantage is there are regional versions of Habbo Hotel. So there's one where you'll go and the language you'll hear is pretty much going to be Spanish or French or other languages. Great place if students want informal language practice. Club Penguin from Disney has come and gone several times. It was gone. Now there's a version of it back again. And this one's aimed at little kids. Right. One advantage of Club Penguin is because it's aimed at little kids, the privacy restrictions, the safety restrictions are pretty strong. Right. And then there's the one that I've done quite a bit of work in, Second Life, or its open source version, OpenSim. So I'll show you some images from there and how we've used that virtual world for education. So one of the advantages of Second Life, if you're working with older students, Second Life is not for kids, right? It's very open. It's the Wild West of virtual worlds. So there are great places, there are museums, and then there are nude beaches. Don't take your elementary school kids to a nude beach. But here is Paris 1900. There are a number of Parises in Second Life. There's ancient Kyoto. I love this example of ancient Kyoto. I should not have made the picture round because I cut off some of the chat. But here's one avatar, the creator of ancient Kyoto, because everything here in Second Life is built by users. Here is somebody functioning as a community translator if people come in and want to learn. They're talking to each other. They're text chatting in this case, all in Japanese. Japanese castles, shops, that sort of thing. So a very interesting, very welcoming environment for students who might want to learn. Lots of interesting art exhibits in a lot of these virtual worlds. And this one, the size of this figure, for example, my avatar would be about the height of the hand. So this is a very large scale art exhibit. Great for bringing students in to discuss the art. What does it mean? What can we do with this? Maybe how do we make our own art in this virtual world? I'm a co-owner in Second Life of something called Edunation Islands, 2 islands focused on education. A lot of educators have their houses here on the islands. We use them for things like conferences. Here's a conference focused on education. You can see a number of avatars here from around the world. We're floating up in the sky to kind of be away from everyone else, but text chat, oral chat, and then of course we're doing some PowerPoints in this case. This is my co-teacher over in Barcelona, again, Melinda Dooley and myself. And we're doing a scavenger hunt with our students because for the most part, they've never met. After the class, sometimes they meet, but it's a long flight. So this is a way that they could interact, explore things, learn about each other together in a virtual environment. They also do telecollaborative meetings in there at times. Here we are up in the sky, out of the way, so they can have a bit of a private meeting. Great for socializing for the students. I can't dance in real life, but in Second Life, I can just click a button and do very awkward, bad dancing, but still better than I could in real life. The advantage to me with some of these virtual worlds, and many of them don't have this advantage, and this goes the same with VR. In a virtual world like this one, I have the ability to build things. So I've put holodecks on our island in Second Life that include ranging from clothing stores to castles, pizza restaurants. Very nice for doing simulations for students, getting them together in a realistic looking environment that cuts out the things they don't need so they can simulate actions that they might have to do if they go to France or to Germany or to Japan in a nice, safe way. This is one that I recently built, a nice sky gallery above our islands. You can see we had an art gallery opening. A lot of people attended. The artists were there, so they could talk about their art. They could interact with people, and especially during coronavirus times in a way that you just couldn't otherwise. Why are these important? Are they important? I do think they are. When you look at the growth of these environments from 2011 to 2021, this is from a couple sites that track them. Here's one that found 290 of these sorts of virtual sites in 2011 and over 1,200 more recently. So their growth has been pretty explosive. Many, many people are playing. You've all seen the statistics, over 1 billion players in these different environments, ranging from World of Warcraft to virtual spaces. Very popular. And they appeal to a wide age range. These are virtual worlds, some of them aimed at young children, like Club Penguin, some of them aimed at the middle range. One of the things I find interesting here, traditionally, I remember when I was in Arizona, the problem with the internet was most of the people on it were men. No longer true. More women than men use the internet now. This is also changing in these virtual environments. You can see here in this 10 to 15 age range, two of the most popular, Stardoll and Pop Tropica, were both dominated by girls rather than boys. So the way they're used and who's using them, it changes, it shifts. And hopefully as time continues, they equalize a little bit more. As we move forward, the shift for me is moving from virtual worlds to what the previous talks were about, was virtual spaces as well. Certainly, VR tech is becoming more widespread. If you look at the user numbers for the Oculus Quest 2, which is the one I showed earlier, during the pandemic in particular, it became very hard to even get these headsets. They were sold out. My wife was looking to buy a couple. She had to get in line. But the studies on these are still relatively limited. And as was mentioned, longitudinal studies especially, I think, are greatly in need. I don't think I need to go into this too much, but sometimes we can think of the difference between low immersion VR or 2.5 VR, like Second Life, the one that I showed you before. And then, of course, high immersion, where you have the full 360 effect. One of the issues with these in the past has been cost. The Google VR is nice, but you still do have to have your phone, right? That's your cost there. The way I think of it, though, is this was the first headset I got, which was the Vive headset. At the time, it was a very good headset. As you can see, you had to have a cable that would run from the back of the headset and plug into a computer, which had to have a very good graphics card. You had to have 2 motion detectors stuck to your walls, and then it worked. It was about $800. Now, though, we're at this stage with the Oculus. There's no more cable. There's no more motion detectors. It's all built into the system, and it's much cheaper, $299, which to me is very promising for the future. As they get cheaper, as they get lighter, as they become easier to use, I think this potential for education increases. When we're talking about it for language learning, you've already heard some of these possible advantages. Lets you go to the country, interact with native speakers, enabling collaboration. All of these become important. And of course, reducing anxiety as well. If you look at some of the research on virtual worlds, a lot of that is going to transfer over to what you're seeing in VR, but some of it will not. Those who have used VR know it is so immersive. The number of bruises I've gotten on my knees when I would try out a VR headset in my office seated. And I was so immersed that I would forget and turn my chair around and smack into my desk. It is a very different experience. And for students, for travel, I think there's strong potential. You know, I don't have a lot of time to talk about the research. You can see some excellent research by someone who's in the audience right now, right? That's looked at some of these elements and, you know, found them engaging, allowed them to focus, enjoyable. But again, we do have this gap, especially on long-term research, which is traditional in education. There's been so little long-term research, period. It's something that we really need to focus on. Right now, I'm doing some research where I'm looking at 6 different spaces to see how they are. We got teachers to go in, 30 teachers exploring these spaces, and we looked at them. Just very briefly mentioning some of them. VR chat, which was mentioned before. I will say that my favorite quote from one of our participants is, "It's a VR space for tweens on crack." I felt I had no privacy. It is a very, very active space, but boy, it's a bit much. Might be a little tricky for education. Mozilla Hubs, some of you may be familiar with. Advantage, you can use it on any headset. You go to their URL. Limitations, ooh, this is one that really made me want to throw up, right? Because of the way it moves. Mike said it has great potential because it has this amazing library of 3D objects you can use, but it is pretty clunky. VR Time, some of you have probably used. Very nice settings. If you want to work with, say, groups of 4 people, very easy to use. There's no movement. You just go and you're already seated, which is an advantage for the motion sickness side. But again, only 4 users, which is a disadvantage. If you have bigger groups, you're not going to get them together. One of them that is a newer one, Spatial, is aimed more for businesses. But again, it functions pretty well. You can have a combination where some people can be in headsets, some people can join into the space via video, which I think is a nice feature. And it's customizable private spaces. It's one I've had pretty good luck with. Alcove, not sure if anybody's familiar with Alcove. Alcove was developed by the American Association for Retired People, actually. And but it's a neat space. One of the nice things in Alcove is you can see down here, this is the travel room. Right? And then in the travel room, you can click on some of these different objects. Like if you click on the sphere, it'll have places you can click on within there and have VR experiences within those spaces, movies, that sort of thing. Or you can travel on a bus in London or a hot air balloon, that sort of thing. So it's a very nice system. But you need Facebook to log in, which really annoyed some of our users. I do have a clip from Alcove. I don't think I'll show it because I'll run out of time if I do. And AltSpace is another one that's already been mentioned. Compatible with a number of devices. Nice advantage, you can have up to 70 users in your space, which would be way too many, but you can. Can't import your own objects, but again, this is the one where they already have set up some language exchange sites, and you can set up your own events in there. It's very nice. It's social, kind of Disney-ish, but I see great potential in this one. Again, I have a clip. I think I'll skip it for now. Pedagogically, equipment, training needs. Do you want to use a public or private space, especially if you're working with younger students? I'm working with somebody in Taiwan right now that would like to do some research, and she's looking at Rec Room. Well, I went in Rec Room yesterday and immediately had some avatar run up to me and start swearing and trying to shoot me. Well, maybe not the nicest for education in that case. But for telecollaborative exchange, I'm interested in doing research in that way. Collaborative building of spaces, especially as spaces come out that make it more easy to develop your own items within the space. I think for teachers, that's going to be critical. Making it so that you can have more interactive tours of cultural locations where you can have your other students or other avatars join in the space, even if it's a photorealistic space, to be able to have people in there interacting in different ways, I think is important. And again, having students create their own events in these spaces where they might invite in outsiders to join in that space, I think are all interesting ideas for research and pedagogy. I am actually just starting some research on Immerse. I'm going to be going in tomorrow morning, actually, with Tricia Thrasher, a student from French at our university, and we're going to start, because this is one that is specifically made for language education and is very VR intensive. So I think there might be some interesting possibilities in this setting. And then, of course, the Microsoft HoloLens for mixed reality, I think does have very interesting potential. Unfortunately, it's still hideously expensive, around $3,000 last time I checked. It gives you more that feeling of a hologram like Star Wars. Not quite, because you have to wear the headset, but there's great possibilities there, I think. So that's it for me. I wanted to make sure to leave some time for Q&A. So I'll open it up if people have questions.
Thank you so much. That was awesome and extensive, more than I expected.
That really was awesome. And that whole edunation, I was like, oh my, edunation. Okay, and now I'm going to have to go find it and look at it, because that is super cool.
Right. I will say, edunation, the holodeck, for example, I have over 100 scenes in there, and I have it set up several places on the island, and anyone is welcome to come there and use the space. If somebody wants a more kind of quote permanent location, we rent out spaces to try and cover our costs. We're not doing it to make a profit, but anyone can bring students there anytime and just use it. I've got lots of things set up there to help students engage in collaboration, ranging from boats to jet skis to scuba diving to all sorts of different things. The Starship Enterprise is in one of the holodecks. Always good for us nerds. So if people are interested, drop me an email, and I'm happy to go in there with people and show them around and talk about the spaces. I do have a TARDIS in there as well for you real Doctor Who fans.
I will so be going in there, but I'm looking at it and I was thinking, oh my God, because we need to do virtual team building with leadership officers in different student organizations. And I was just like, yes, oh my goodness. Okay, anyway, sorry. I had a total geek out moment.
Right. It's interesting, when Second Life first started, it's going to change the world. Typical, right? The hype was very high. It didn't quite meet the hype. It was a bit challenging for a lot of computers when it first came out in terms of the needs for graphic cards and bandwidth. That's not really the case anymore, though, right? Computers have caught up. So I do think if you're looking for a space to meet with students where the technical requirements aren't going to be too high, but there is very strong possibilities for interaction. Some of these now old virtual world spaces, I think, still have very interesting potential.
This is Alicia, and I have a question for you. I'm just curious. A chat, yes. Yes, I will do that. I'm just curious about your perception on, because I keep hearing people talk about things being VR based that are really virtual worlds, but not in a headset. And I'm curious what you think about the future of using headsets, and then like the near future. I know you're talking about holodecks and things like that, which I'm hopeful for, and you see caves and all that. But for now, what do you see as the future of people using actual VR? And is there, do you think it's necessary? Do you think it adds to the experience, or what are your thoughts?
It is interesting because the word immersive, I think, is the key. And there is no doubt, especially some of you have played some of the headset games. There's one that I can't quite remember the name, Darth Vader Unlimited, Darth Vader something, that I've played on the Quest, where you go in and it is that feeling of full immersion. You know, you're in a cave and you look up and you see things, and you look behind you and you hear all this. I think that the key with VR going forward connects to both the previous talks before. How do we make use of its power in a way that's not gimmicky, but that really gives students, with any of this technology, I say, does it do for students something that you can't do in a regular classroom? Thank you, Vader Immortal, right? Because that's the key. Sometimes we use technologies in ways that are kind of ridiculous. I've seen studies where it was about text chat back in the old days, and is it effective? And then you realize the students are sitting in the same computer lab, text chatting with each other. It's like, they're right there. Just talk with them. So I do see VR, especially as the headsets continue to evolve, having great potential. One nice thing I like with the Quest is, as soon as I started to set it up, it said, do you want essentially the normal mode or the Queasy mode for people who get queasy? Yes, please give me the Queasy mode. Most of these headsets also have multiple ways to move. They have what they call natural movement, and then they have the teleport movement. Well, natural movement for me feels like, you're supposed to be walking forward, but I feel like I'm not walking forward and everything is moving around me, which makes me seasick. But if they have the teleport movement, it doesn't make me queasy. I think they're working very hard on those issues, because that's super important. And just things like weight. This one's substantially lighter than my previous one, and I think that will continue to evolve, because that's a big issue. You're right that wearing these for extended periods can become uncomfortable. I think that is where also the Microsoft HoloLens is interesting, where we start to have this element where you can see what's around you, but it seems to be projecting elements into your world, which is cool. So where will it go? I don't know. But I think, to me, one of the big issues right now with VR and education is there just hasn't been that much, relatively speaking, developed for us. There's been a lot for games and that sort of thing. And this is where we have this gap that we need to fill.
Definitely. Thank you. I think
A lot of piecemeal and adapting from the games to try to make it fit for what you needed to do. Yes, very much so.
Yeah. The participants in this study that we're finishing up right now, are all educators. And that's one of the questions we asked them, that of these virtual spaces that we had them look at, none of which are for education, but what are the elements you liked in there? What are the elements you didn't like? Because I think that's the stage we're at as educators. What do we need to do? We need to pick and choose. We need to think about the things that are going to work and maybe the things that won't, to develop our own spaces.
And Dr. Tusi Hirumi, should I call, in class we always call him Tusi. So Dr. Tusi, Dr. Hirumi, what would you prefer we call you?
Tusi's fine. I prefer not Dr. Tusi, because it kind of sounds like Dr. Phil, and I don't want to be considered like a pop psychologist. But I've been called lots of names, so I really don't mind any of the above.
Okay. Well,
I like Sensei. I really like Sensei. Because of my Japanese background. I do have a question for Randall, though.
Yes.
Randall, the Second Life stuff was really cool. I really got into it when it first came out, but I've kind of got away from it because I was working with some game designers and figure out how to create interactive objects that kind of replicated different types of game mechanics.
Yeah.
So we wanted to create an island of interactive educational entertainment.
Yeah.
If you will. And we wanted to give people these different objects that they could take and put in their own space to make it interactive and engaging based on game mechanics.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with that?
Yes. Actually, this is one of the changes that they made in Second Life a few years back to me, that for educators is like, why didn't you have this from the start? There's something they call Second Life experiences, right? So it's a different kind of scripting, so that if you have an island, you can have students, when they come in, for example, say, blah, 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 welcome, click here to start, right? And if they click, a permission box is going to come up that says Second Life experiences would like to allow objects on this island to do. There's a list, typically depends what you do. If they click yes, then things suddenly become much more automatic. Those of you who have worked in Second Life know in the past, for example, let's say I wanted to give Tusi a HUD, heads up display. Well, I would have to put out a box. He would click on the box. It would go into his inventory. Then he would pull it out to open up the box. Then it would go into folder. Then he would pull it on himself. Now, instead, I just worked with a student in Turkey for this. She wanted to have a HUD for her students to engage in nonverbal communication. It had all sorts of emojis and also movements on it. The students go to the space, they walk through the box, and automatically now it's on their screen. So you could, and same thing with like teleporting, changing clothes. It lets you do things with the students automatically now that used to be this long pain in the neck process. So it's really made it much easier, I think, for educators. Once you get that set up, it makes it interesting, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll follow up with email.
Great. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, Dr. Sadler, if it's possible, I've had requests for me to share your PowerPoint slides on the website eventually. So if you're okay with sharing them.
Right. What I'll do is
went to a meeting.
I'll probably make a version, because the two movies in there right now are embedded in the PowerPoint, which means it's a ridiculously large PowerPoint. I'll put the videos on YouTube and I'll link them instead, and then I'll share it that way.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I mean, I'm this is recorded, but people are asking, so I am trying to comply.
Right.
Thank you so much. I did want to just make a note. I think that your research is, or I don't even know that this is necessarily your research, but more just your perspective on this idea of immersion all the way back in text-based experiences, because I really hadn't thought about that. And I think it's so telling. And it reminds me of my dissertation work was largely focused on social presence. And whenever I talk about social presence being that sense of connection that people have with other people, I say, but remember, you can get social presence from reading a book. You can feel like you know them and you're connected to them, or from writing a letter, or reading a letter from someone who has passed even. You can have that sense of social presence. So it makes sense that you could have presence in a text-based environment and immersion, but I had not really thought about it. So thank you.
Yeah, one of my friends growing up had a computer, and he got Zork, which some of you may know, which was one of the early kind of adventure games, single player, right? But we're down in his basement, talk about the stereotype, right? In his mom's basement, we're down there playing this game, and we had some big sheets of butcher paper, right? And it was immersive enough that as we're playing, we're literally mapping it out on the butcher paper. So we had multiple sheets because there were different levels, right? And it did feel very immersive to us, to be connected into the story. And especially when you see some of these other ones where you do start to be able to encounter other players. Old history, but good stuff.
I was muted. Thank you so much. And thank you for your presentation. And with no further ado, I will introduce our final keynote speaker